Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for the second edition of our virtual Ocean Cafe series. We are able to offer these talks for free thanks to the generosity of our supporters and could not do it without them. If it is within your means, we ask that you too contribute to OPAC's mission of empowering the next generation of ocean heroes. Tonight's talk is live here on Zoom and will also be broadcast to our Facebook channel, as well as recorded for our YouTube channel. Make sure that you like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you are the first one to know about future OPAC events. We do ask that you please keep yourself muted throughout tonight's presentation. If you do have questions during the talk, please use the chat function on Zoom and the comment section on Facebook. I will do my best to monitor that throughout the presentation. And then we will have a Q&A at the end of our guest presentation. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Brian Kennedy, who is a marine ecologist in the Rochen Lab at Boston University. Prior to joining Boston University, he spent 8 years with NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. During his tenure with NOAA, he served in numerous roles, including, but not limited to, Expedition Manager, Deputy Program Manager, and Telepresence Coordinator, all associated with the explorations aboard the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer. Brian has led projects in both the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean and has overseen the first deep submergence work ever conducted in the Phoenix Islands protected area in several U.S. territories. Now at Boston University, Brian has broad research interests, including but not limited to deep sea ecology, marine protected areas, ocean exploration, and the technology to better access and document the deep ocean. We are so happy he could join us tonight to speak about his work. And with that, I welcome Brian Kennedy.
Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, Jeff, can you see that?
Can, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming tonight. It's great to have a chance to talk to all of you. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go through a little bit about ocean exploration in general, the deep water marine protected areas of the United States, and then kind of some of the deep water habitats that we are still exploring and learning about. So I'm sure you all probably recognize this image. It's a pretty iconic image. This is just a Google Earth kind of composite, not actually a satellite view, but as most of us are in North America, this is probably what you think about from the view from space. If I were to just say, hey, picture, planet Earth from 23,000 miles. And then if I ask you to think about the other side of the globe, you would probably envision something like this, the Horn of Africa with Saudi Arabia there in the center, the Middle East, kind of Russia and Eastern Europe. But really, we've only looked at we're still not looking at the whole planet, because if I told you that there was a whole nother side of the planet you probably never think about, this is the Southern Ocean, the South Pacific. You kind of got New Zealand down there on the bottom left, Antarctica way down to the south, Chile and Peru over there, just kind of barely visible on the eastern side of the globe here. And yet there's one more view in which you can see almost no land. This is the North Pacific. That's Papua New Guinea and Indonesia down in the bottom left, the Aleutian Island chain up in the top, Japan over on the top left, and then a little bit of California, Mexico, and Canada over there. So if you think about the view from space, really this is a blue planet. 71% of the ocean, the planet's surface is water, and the average depth of that ocean is about 4,500 meters, or a little over, not quite 2 miles. So really this is much more of a blue planet about the ocean, but we as terrestrial creatures really think about the planet in terms of its land area, not its ocean area. And this is a major amount of real estate, and 98% of the Earth's habitable space is actually in the planet, or excuse me, in the ocean. So it's really an amazing thing every time I look at these images about how much of the ocean actually covers the planet, and how much of our livable habitat is the ocean. So as you think about marine protected areas and how we protect the deep ocean, it's really very few. The United Nations has set a goal of 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. There is hope that we will get there. Certain countries are really well ahead of others, but I'm not sure. And that's going to take concerted effort for us to really meet some of those target goals in the next 10 years. But as we think about the United States and its deep water marine monuments, so these are all of the national marine monuments in the United States. The US actually has one of the largest ocean, controls one of the largest areas of ocean of any country because of our exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, in the Pacific is quite extensive, but because the US claims these ocean territories: Wake Island, Johnston Atoll, Palmyra, Jarvis, and Howland and Baker, as well as the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. And then over here in the bottom left, we have the newest marine monument in the collection is the Atlantic Canyons and Seamounts Monument just off the coast of New England, which was just added about 4 years ago now, but has been pretty hotly contested in the court system of whether it's going to survive or not. So these encompass the vast majority of the US marine protected areas, and certainly the most deep water area that's protected in the United States. So what we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit more about some of these areas and the habitats that exist in them. So when you think about what's actually in the deep sea and how much we know about this, it's really very little. We kind of throw around this round figure of 95% of the ocean is still unexplored, and the strange creatures that live there just blow my mind. The top right here is a vampire squid. It's really not a good name for it because it basically just filter feeds and eats plankton. And then here on the bottom left is a fish called a barrel eye. And so what you're looking at here, these green orbs that you see over here are actually its eyes, and it has a fully gelatinous forehead, and its eyes are looking up. So these things that over here that look like its eyes are actually its nostrils. That's where it smells, and then its mouth's right here. And as we understand it, the way these hunt is they swim around looking up towards the surface of the water, maybe 500-600 meters, you know, a quarter or even half a mile below the surface. And they look until they see something silhouetted against the light of the surface. And then those eyes actually rotate forward as the fish tilts its body up and can line its mouth up with the food source it's trying to eat. So these are strange, amazing creatures that we've only known about for 20 or 30 years sometimes, and sometimes even less. To give you a little bit of a perspective of how big the ocean is, the Mariana Trench, Challenger Deep, is nearly 11,000 meters below the sea surface. And that's enough to swallow Mount Everest. So this is a scale model of how deep Everest is to how, or tall Everest is to how deep the Mariana Trench is. And give you a sense of, even if you were to sail across the ocean and know, or even map the entire sea floor, there's a huge amount of livable space in the midwater, as we call it, the space between the seafloor and the surface. So I'm guessing some of you can probably think about what this image is, or what this creature is. This is a giant squid. It's actually one of the first images ever captured by Edie Witter and her team off the coast of Japan in 2012. So this is a creature we've known about for quite some time. If you think about, like, back to the stories of the Kraken from, the age of sail and exploration, we've kind of had ideas in at least legend and folklore of the giant squid that would attack ships and eat sailors. And for a long time, scientists kind of thought it was a myth and just something old sailors talked about. But then we started dragging them up in nets and finding them washed up on the shore in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, and science came around to realize, and there really is a squid out there the size of like a school bus, 30 feet in length, with including its tentacles. So in the 70s, people started trying to find these actively. And they have been subject to multiple expeditions, millions of dollars of research money, throwing the best technology humans had in the deep ocean towards trying to find something the size of a school bus. And it wasn't until 2012 that scientists were successful in finding this creature and videoing it live in the deep sea in its natural habitat. Since then, I believe it's only been documented 2 or 3 times live in the deep sea. So this is still one of the hardest to find creatures in the world, despite its size. What's even more amazing to me now is that we now know from carcasses and things that there's a squid even larger, known as a colossal squid, that's still never been seen alive, that's thought to live in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica. So there still are monsters in the deep sea to be found, and these huge huge areas of ocean. So the data I'm going to be sharing with you all today and the pictures come from this project called the Capstone Project. It was a 3-year project to visit all of the U.S. deep water marine protected areas in the Pacific. It was run by NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research while I was there.
Trying to connect to that thing that Brian's supposedly doing.
We covered, I forget the exact number, I think it was 37 different cruises across the Pacific and 187 ROV dives, and 600,000 square kilometers of ocean mapped. So this is actually the ship's cruise track. Throughout the 3 years, we based in and out of Hawaii and visited all the U.S. territories in the Pacific and every one of the marine protected areas, and a couple marine protected areas in international waters like the Phoenix Islands protected area. So all of this came from this vessel, America's ship for ocean exploration, the Okeanos Explorer. She was my home for a couple years. In the last 10 or 11 years, I think I spent about 2 years at sea on this ship, all around the Pacific and North Atlantic. And to give you an idea, this was my office. This is the control room on the ship. That's me on the left, and I'm standing there with Dr. Chris Kelly from the University of Hawaii. And this is the nerve center of the ship. This is where we controlled the ROVs, run the mapping systems, and it's a dark room with just a wall of screens. I think at last count there was 80-something screens in that room. And it takes a team of about 10 people at any time to run the entire operation while the ROV is in the water. So these are our tools. You'll hear me use the term remotely operated vehicle quite a bit here. And so that's our submersibles here. You'll see in a second how we kind of run these together, but it's a 2-body system as we call it. So both of these vehicles, Sirius here as what we call a camera platform, sitting here on the deck, and then this is Deep Discoverer, the actual vehicle who you'll see most of the video and pictures from. Deep Discoverer is about just shy of 10,000 pounds. It's 10 feet long by 8 feet wide by 9 feet long. So it's larger than your average SUV. And that allows us to have all the pressure tolerant housings and have enough flotation to keep it neutrally buoyant in the water. But before we can play with the ROV and go down and see what lives there, the first thing we really need is to make a map. So this is a multi-beam sonar image of the seafloor. And so what the ship does is we call it mowing the lawn, and that's literally going back in a grid pattern and just mapping the seafloor. And so here you have a very complex topography that is generally, when we see a lot of complex topography, it's good for animal life, because a lot of the deep sea is based on its need to have hard ground or exposed rock for things like corals and sponges to grow on. So the first thing we do is make a map. And then we start looking for interesting things in the bathymetry, as we call it, or the bathymetric or topographic map we end up with the seafloor. So this one, a couple things stands out here that are really cool. Up here in this corner, this kind of zigzag and this other more straight feature here. This image is actually from off the southeast United States. And we believe these are, these scoured areas are iceberg scours. So when during the last ice age, when sea level was much, much lower, we believe large icebergs would actually come and run aground on the continental slope and shelf. And the wind and the current was strong enough to cause them to dig 25-meter deep scars into the seafloor. So now these are hundreds, let's see, this is 360 meters underwater now, but it would have been much closer to the surface about 18,000 years ago at the last glacial maximum. Or one of the glacial maximums. So these are the kind of different features we look for in the sonar data to try and find potentially interesting targets to go look at the life there. But we're exploring places we've never seen before. We don't know what we're going to find, and the ship only has room for enough people. So we employ what we call telepresence technology to kind of leverage the ability of modern communications to engage more scientists. So we have Deep Discoverer down here on the bottom that's tethered to Sirius, that's then tethered to the ship. And then the ship has a giant satellite dish on it that uploads to a satellite which is bounced back down to shore. And that allows people like you to watch in near real time, as well as other scientists. So if we make a discovery or we find something we don't know what it is on the ship, we can email, text message, phone call immediately around while we're still doing the initial characterization, and find the appropriate experts to help us understand what we're looking at and get them on the video to help us in real time. This is a huge cost savings in terms of not missing discoveries when we're only going to these places that have never been to before and likely won't be visited again for years, if not decades following. So being able to engage potentially 100+ scientists at one time, even if only 2 or 3 on the vessel, is a really powerful tool. And as bandwidth and satellites get better and cheaper, this technology will only grow. And this diagram's kind of a little bit futuristic in having these autonomous submarines here, or AUVs as we call them, depicted here, with unmanned surface vehicles following them. Also, we're right on the cutting edge of being able to do that. There's a couple people that have done it. There's one commercial entity that's doing it commonly now, and we're looking at utilizing this type of swarm technology of having many vehicles working together simultaneously. The pilot projects and the first kind of commercial operations are going on now, but I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see this much more as the normal operation. Instead of one ship, one ROV, you're going to see one ship, 1 or 2 ROVs, and a handful of autonomous vehicles helping to do scouting. So coming back to the vehicles a little bit, here's another picture of Deep Discover just about to get deployed. And to give you a sense of what Deep Discover's cameras are capable of, this is an Iridogorgia coral. And so this is, I don't remember exactly how deep this particular one, but you see these anywhere from about 1,000 meters down to about 3,500 meters, sometimes a little deeper. And this is the type of imagery we get from Deep Discover. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and now talk about the different ecosystems that you see in the deep sea. And so this will just be lots of pictures and talking about kind of the different types of habitats that you find in the US deep water, especially in its marine protected areas. So I think many of you have probably seen these black smokers. These are super hot, volcanically warmed waters that come out of the seafloor, and all that black smoke basically is super hot water that's has all kinds of mineral ladenness in it. These are pretty famous and iconic. You see them a lot of times in Blue Planet and some of the things like that. But what you don't know about as much, or aren't as common, is these clear smokers or white smokers that are lower temperature vents, but still have really unique chemosynthetic communities around them. So chemosynthesis is, let me back up and say, all the energy that you and I eat that comes from our food ultimately comes from the sun. The sun sends solar energy to Earth, plants photosynthesize it, takes that energy, fixes carbon, turns that energy into food, more or less, that we can either eat the plants, or some meat that we eat eats the plants and becomes meat, and then we eat it. So the energy, which allows me to talk, allows you to sit and watch this, whatever, ultimately comes from the sun. And that's through photosynthesis. On the deep sea, there's an alternate pathway called chemosynthesis, that instead of being the energy coming from the sun, the energy comes from the heat of the Earth's core. That puts mineral compositions, hydrogen sulfide generally, creates it in the heat of the Earth, and then comes up through these hydrothermal vents, and there are bacteria that convert that energy into fixed carbon, or what we would consider food. And then things like these shrimp and stuff like that eat that bacteria, or through mutualism share carbon through kind of complicated symbiotic mutualism that I won't talk about tonight, but it's really cool if you are interested in that kind of thing. So theoretically, this ecosystem is more or less completely independent from the surface waters and is only dependent on the heat of the planet's Earth's core. This is another example of a hot water chemosynthetic community. These are Riftia tube worms that are found around the Galapagos. You can kind of find them a little bit in the Mariana Trench, but not as much, which is actually the only place outside of American Samoa in the US that has these hydrothermal vents that are in a protected area. Then we also have what we consider cold water, cold seep communities. And so this is from the Gulf of Mexico. This is a brine pool. So what you're looking at here is super hypersaline water that is much denser than normal ocean water. And so it forms as a lake at the bottom of the seafloor and gets down in these crevices and depressions. And if you look at it from the ROV, it actually looks like a helicopter flying over a lake, not necessarily just another layer of water. And these can be chemosynthetic communities too, but around the edges, but they also are hypersaline to the point that they're toxic. So you can see all these mussels here. The mussels that are out of the water on the periphery of the brine pool are alive and eating away at the hydrogen sulfide, the bacteria they have. But as the level of the brine pool fluctuates, it actually kills the mussels. So you have this really interesting gradation between the live chemosynthetic community, the brine pool, and the dead mussels where the brine pool is invaded. We can take a little bit closer look at the mussels here. So these are the Bathymodiolus mussels, and they live in these dense aggregations, all trying to fight over being closer to the hydrogen sulfide vents. And you can see a lot of other creatures in here, these polyplacophorans or chitons living here. See what else is in here. There's usually different types of worms and stuff. This whole ecosystem is based at the bottom of the sea, completely independent from the surface for the most part. You also, in strange things in the Gulf of Mexico, you can get these mud volcanoes. This is a very tiny one. But this is where you get methane bubbles naturally coming out of the seafloor. And a lot of times they come with different types of sediment and stuff and make these little volcano type things, and they burp bubbles, and we call them mud volcanoes. And they can get quite big, on the order of kilometers in size. This one's only a few centimeters. And then these are another type of tube worms, but these are found around the cold seeps as well. So they're processing the hydrogen sulfide that comes up without the temperature variations like the big rift here we were looking at a minute ago. And then this is yet another example, but this is really cool. This white stuff in here is methane. It's ice crystals of methane called methane hydrate. And so the methane naturally comes out of the seafloor and then gets caught in this overhang. And because it's so cold and there's so much pressure down here, we're talking about hundreds to thousands of pounds per square inch in pressure and only a few degrees Celsius. So 2, maybe 3, 4 degrees Celsius. So that's about in the 30s in Fahrenheit. And you get these really interesting, they're called a clathrate is the kind of more chemical technical term for them. And then you get weird creatures like these ice worms living on them. So these actually live on the methane hydrate, and some bacteria will form on the methane hydrate to help break down the methane, and these ice worms eat the bacteria off of the methane crystals. So as we're thinking about the chemosynthetic communities here, I think it's really important to note that a lot of these I've shown you, all of the cold seeps stuff here, so the last couple of tube worms, the methane hydrates, the brine pool, the mud volcano, they're all generally found in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States, which really lacks, it doesn't have any deep water marine protected areas. Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary protects some of the coral areas, and they've been looking at expanding it into some of the deeper water areas, which I don't know if that's happened or not yet. And these areas are protected directly from oil and gas drilling, but there is no large-scale marine protected area in the Gulf of Mexico. So it's just, as we talk about marine protected areas and think about protecting the deep sea, I think it's really important to note that the only chemosynthetic vent communities that are protected, there's one in American Samoa, but most of them are in the Marianas, associated with the Commonwealth of the Marianas north of Guam. So what we see more in the Pacific, which is mainly what's protected in the marine national monuments, is the seamounts. And these are literally just underwater mountain chains or individual mountains. And they host amazingly diverse communities of corals and sponges. They're a little different than shallow coral reefs in the technical sense, but for the most part, they serve a lot of the same purposes, and the corals and sponges here build structure that other organisms live in. They're incredibly beautiful, and they can be incredibly old. These are paragorgids or paragorgiids. they're not one of the older species, but some of the black corals have been aged to more than 4,000 years old. Think about that for a minute. A single creature that has been alive for 4,000 years. These paragorgids are probably hundreds of years old. We also find these softer corals like this Anthomastus, and these have no hard skeletons like you would think of with shallow water reefs or anything. They are purely kind of inflate themselves with water, but they can also retract in and get really small. But you don't only see sessile organisms that sit still and just filter the water. There's crazy looking fish like this deep water frogfish. It's a type of anglerfish. So you see this little nub right here, that's its fishing lure. And so what it actually does is it sits here and flicks this in and out, trying to catch or attract another fish to come try and eat that, thinking it's a worm or something. And then the frogfish will open its mouth and gobble it up. I kind of mentioned a little bit about how the deep water corals and sponges form habitat, and you almost never can find one of these corals that doesn't have something or many things living in it. So this is a little shrimp taking refuge in a chrysogorgia. And so we don't really know how much these shrimp move around or not. It's thought that some of the other organisms like brittle stars probably find one coral when they're young and then never leave that coral and spend their entire life living in the coral. Some of the other structures that you see in the deep sea that are really important are the canyons. So this is Hudson Canyon, which is just off the mouth of New York City. And to give you a sense of the scale, this is a cross section across the canyon. This is the Empire State Building. This little thing right here is the Empire State Building. So Hudson Canyon rivals in size the Grand Canyon. And it's just one of several dozen canyons all up and down the US East Coast. It's the biggest, but oceanographer, hydrographer canyons are rival in size. And then there are numerous smaller canyons like Veitch and Hazen and Nigrin canyons. And these are incredibly important for supporting fish. They attract tuna, they feed whales. Because of the different complex bathymetry and hydrographic conditions, how the water moves causes the water to stir, making it great places for animals to live and eat. And you see all kinds of cool, commercially available species like this Chasion crab living on a coral here. You can also see giant creatures. This is a Greenland shark. We think this one was about 14 feet in length. And some recent work in Greenland actually has shown that a shark this big is probably about 400 years old. They have extremely slow metabolisms that allow them to live a long time, and they just kind of cruise to the deep water looking for food, and then they'll have like a quick burst of activity in order to catch it. But I've only ever seen them in the slow kind of cruise mode, and they are just magical creatures to watch swimming, especially knowing that they were born probably in the 1600s, or one this size was. And then you see also in the soft sediments, all kinds of other amazing creatures like this bobtail squid sitting here on the bottom, and then another probably nudibranch crawling past it. And then the last of the benthic habitats, or last of the seafloor habitats I'll talk about, is the abyssal plain. So if you go out off the seamounts, out of the canyons, out to the just kind of the floor of the ocean, you find the flattest surface on the planet, where the average slope is less than half a degree and goes on for thousands of kilometers. But just because it's flat and mainly muddy doesn't mean it's not chock full of life. So this is a type of anemone that's climbed up a dead stalk. And you see these long trailing arms. This is how it eats. It just sits above the seafloor and lets the current flow over it while kind of cleaning out the water, catching all the little detritus and things floating by. And this is likely a new species that was found in 4,100 meters in the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone, which is probably the first place that will be subject to large-scale deep-sea mining, where they're going to go and try and collect all of these little nodules here, have commercial value in manganese, other kind of rare earth elements, some copper, and a whole bunch of elements I can't even pronounce that are super valuable in modern technologies like iPhones, wind turbines, solar panels, batteries. And so there's a it's going to start as soon as next year, likely another year or two, but you're going to start seeing large scale deep sea mining. And the UN, the International Seabed Authority, is responsible for coming up with what they call the mining code and how that's going to be conducted. And that document is under draft now. And there's a lot of political activity setting policy, trying to make sure those policies and requirements are as good as possible. You do see fish out here. This is a Bathysaurus. Probably this one's about 1/2 meter long or 1.5 feet. And they're ambush predators. They just sit in the seafloor and wait for something to swim over it and then lunge out and grab it. And then inside the sediment, we have these things called meiofauna, or things that live in between the sediment grains. And the meiofauna of the deep sea is one of the more diverse ecosystems in the world, which is really hard for us to think about because you just see kind of flat, endless mud. But the biodiversity of what lives inside that mud rivals shallow water coral reefs and rainforests. But it's all just microscopic. And there's a lot of active science trying to figure out why the deep sea, muds of the deep sea host such an incredibly species-rich assemblage of animals, because it really flies in the face of most of what we understand of what drives high biodiversity on land. So this is something that is still very much a puzzlement to deep sea biologists on why such a cold place with so little food available, because most of the food here, these aren't chemosynthetic communities, they're still dependent on sunlight. So all the food has to rain down from the surface. And it really is counterintuitive, as we understand it, why there's so many little things that live in the sediment. And I don't think we're going to figure that out anytime soon. So now I'm going to leave the benthos, or the seafloor, and talk about some of the strange creatures that live higher in the water column. So the midwater, just literally the space between the seafloor and the sea surface, is the largest single biome in the planet. And it has all of these crazy clear, mostly clear, some aren't, organisms like this borelet squid. So this is actually a squid. You can see its feeding tentacles here, and then its other arms here. Its eyes are looking up. And then in order to protect itself, a lot of deep sea organisms try and be as clear as possible, or they turn red. And they turn red, or they evolve to be red, because red light gets absorbed by water the fastest. And so if you're deep, dark red in the deep sea, it's basically like wearing black in the surface water and on land. It makes it much, much harder to see. So this is something called a dinner plate jelly. This is about 10 centimeters or 5 inches across in diameter. And again, you see that kind of classic clear color. And it's really, really energetically expensive to make clear tissue. So from an evolutionary standpoint, a lot of energy gets put into these creatures trying to be clear. And some things, you can't really see it here, but a lot of times you can actually see the digestive tract and the reproductive organs are often the only things that aren't clear in a lot of these deep sea creatures. The midwater also has numerous fish. This is a lancet fish. And there's another species of fish called a bristlemouth, which is a type of myctophid that is thought to be the most numerous creature on the planet, with trillions of them existing to make hundreds of millions of tons of biomass. And they exist all over the ocean, and they migrate from the deep ocean during the day where they hide in the dark, and then they come up as much as 1 kilometer or more every night to feed in the shallow waters in the dark, and then retreat back into the abyss during the day. And it's the world's largest migration. There are other amazing things like this Hydromedusae. And so here you see some areas where this particular creature hasn't been able to evolve clear tissue. So it's mostly clear, but some of these areas was too energetically expensive, or it just didn't have the phenotypic plasticity, for the scientific word, but the range of traits in order to be selected on in order for those tissues to turn clear. And then I'll kind of leave you with this last image of the midwater. This is a ctenophore comb jelly. It's actually pretty distant relative of the more traditional jellyfish, but this one eats other jellyfish. If you look real close, inside here, you can see the outline of another ctenophore that is recently eaten. So these actually unzip, kind of picture like the blob, and envelop smaller ctenophores and then re-zip back up. And this might take days to weeks to digest this other one. This is a still image, but we could actually see the smaller ctenophore swimming around inside the bigger ctenophore when we took this image. So I just want to close here with one more slide of some opportunities. I know we've got some students in the audience and teachers. So these are some of great resources that for the high school and undergrad kind of level. The National Ocean Sciences Bowl is a super awesome organization that does like academic quiz bowl kind of thing all about ocean sciences for the high school level. I participated 3 years in high school, and it legitimately changed my career track. I picked my college based out of people I met there. It opened a lot of doors. And so if you're an educator and don't have one of these at your school, I would recommend you get one. If you're a student and have opportunity to participate, I really would recommend it. It's a fantastic program. And then for the undergraduate level, here's a couple scholarships and internship programs. I benefited from the Ernest Holling Scholarship. I have several friends who were EPP, MSI people, as well as WHOI's partnership program. So these are all really great opportunities that I'd recommend people look into. And with that, I will close and be happy to entertain some questions.
Thank you, Brian. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. That was amazing. And I will now turn it over for some questions. I will ask that if you have a question, you please put it in the chat, and we will field them as they come through. And as people have a minute to do that, I'm just going to start off with one question for you, Brian, that I had. And that is, how does the average person or the citizen scientist get involved with ocean exploration and marine protected areas, especially right now when we're all stuck at home?
So the fun thing with a lot of the ocean exploration is they live stream what they're doing. So the EV Nautilus from Ocean Exploration Trust live streams all of their work. I believe they're in for the winter. The RV Falcor from the Schmidt Ocean Institute also live streams most of their dives, as well as the Okeanos Explorer with NOAA, are all really good places to just watch along. Now it's the winter and right now, so I don't believe any of those ships are sailing at the moment. But they'll start back sailing kind of early in the spring, I suspect. And then, so much of what we know or don't know about the deep ocean is just because we haven't had enough effort. And these expeditions are expensive, and a lot of them are publicly funded. So for kind of the action item is, make sure your elected representatives know that ocean exploration you think is valuable and that these are important things and that impacts your vote. And so that's really a powerful thing when it comes to, making sure those who allocate budgets know that this is something that their constituents want. And likewise with marine protected areas. The U.S. has a pretty complicated different tiers of marine protected areas. There are areas that are prohibited by fishing that are controlled by the fisheries management councils. There's the National Marine Sanctuary Program. There are the national marine monuments that I talked about, and each of them have different legal frameworks and management structures and things like that. So it really kind of depends. So get familiar with what's in your area, what's in your hometown. If there is a national marine sanctuary there, those have citizen advisory boards and have education outreach opportunities for school kids and stuff like that that can really use a lot of volunteer help, a lot of community support. The monuments are a little more less community oriented and more kind of top down control from the White House level. But even with for you all being in New England, the Atlantic Canyon Seamounts Monument has been in a lot of jeopardy. There was serious legal efforts to prevent it from being formed or actually end it. And so the New England Aquarium and a few other groups have really been leading the charge in trying to mount a legal defense of that. The Natural Resources Defense Council as well. And those organizations, they need donations and support and letter writing campaigns and things like that as well to be able to help support those activities.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot that we can all do from home. And I did just get another question in the chat here for you. And the question is, what was the name of the fish that has the largest overall biomass again?
That was a bristlemouth.
Bristlemouth. So I think that's actually a good transition into another question I had for you, which is there's all of these species that we know exist out there, but we don't know they exist yet. And you mentioned that there's the campaign for protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. Do you know how much of the ocean is actually protected right now? And of that, how much of it is highly protected?
Off the top of my head, I don't know what the number is right now, but there is a quick website you can go to called mpaatlas.com, which is a really good resource, and that's where I would go to look at it. And they keep those numbers up to date. Last time I looked at it, which was 2 or 3 months ago, I just don't remember what the number was.
Okay, yeah. See something else coming in here. There's a comment about how there's some very old plants on our planet, 4,000-year-old plants and 400-year-old fish. Are there any other species that have unique characteristics like that you found?
So I don't do a lot of the aging work myself. So I don't know, I don't know the details, I guess, of a lot of the different ones, but the black corals tend to be particularly old. That's the one that we think can be in the many thousands of years. I just kind of basically assume anything in the deep sea, coral-wise, is in the hundreds of years old. And then the fish, it's a lot of effort to go through all the radiometric dating and carbon isotope analysis and stuff like that to figure out how old these animals are. And so it's a matter of, for the most part, that's not a high priority in the deep sea right now. So I wouldn't say a lot of these things have been aged well, and their growth patterns and habitat, like we're just at this point describing these species. We're nowhere near trying to understand most of their reproductive habits and lifespans and things along those lines.
Yeah. So the next question that just came in here, are there any oysters? And I'll add to that, are there any shellfish at 1,000 meters down?
Yes, there are definitely shellfish. I don't know of any oysters, but you definitely see mussels and clams well into thousands of meters underwater, generally associated with the hydrothermal vents or the cold seeps is where we see the most of them. But yes, absolutely, those I saw, mainly they were mussels, but there were a few clams mixed in there too, and those sites were several thousand meters underwater.
Yeah. And I'm just going to give everyone another minute or so to pop your questions into the chat or virtually raise your hand. And my last question for you is, as we think about putting more marine protected areas around the world, is there any damage that we can do by putting some of these protections out there on ecosystems that we don't fully understand yet?
So I don't think you're going to do damage by protecting something. Generally, the precautionary principle, the idea of not inaction if you don't know the answer, I don't think protection is ever a bad idea. I will say that there is some well-founded pushback on these area targets where we're going to say we're going to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. There is a push then for countries, politicians, policymakers, diplomats to try and meet those targets, and by protecting the easiest areas of the ocean to protect and not necessarily the most important areas to protect. So a lot of these large-scale marine protected areas, 100,000 square kilometers or more, are being put in the most remote places on the planet, which I'm all for protecting them, but there's not a lot of human activity there now. You see areas like the British, I believe it was the British, just made the area around Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic and Ascension Island a massive marine protected area, but there's practically no fishing down there, and there's very little industry. So those waters are more or less right now de facto protected. And so it's great to know that they'll be protected in the future, but it really didn't change anything now. And so I think there is some danger in these area targets of people are just protecting the low-hanging fruit in areas in these super remote places and aren't going in and protecting areas that are being heavily fished that need some relief or some protected areas to reserve them. So the perfect example of this is, like, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but well in excess of 90% of the marine protected area in the United States is in the remote Pacific. And it's only within the last 4 years with the creation of the Atlantic Canyons and Seamounts Monument. That's the first large-scale marine protected area in the Atlantic, Caribbean, or Gulf of Mexico in U.S. waters. They're smaller ones, but they're very small compared to something like the large ocean areas we're talking about here with the Atlantic Canyons and Seamounts Monument. And part of that is it's been very hard, and there have been really super staunch legal challenges to it by the fishing industry and places like that who have good arguments. I mean, I don't mean to say that protection is the only answer and it should just be willy-nilly protected anywhere, but so I think the only downside to the protection is protecting places that aren't in danger right now and calling it a win, instead of having some of the hard policy debates and protecting areas more evenly, or targeting particularly vulnerable places and making sure it's protected.
Yeah. So we're basically taking the not in my backyard scenario and putting it not on my coastline scenario.
Pretty much, yeah.
So there actually were 2 more questions while you're answering that. And I'm going to stop after those 2 questions because I know everyone has a very busy schedule right now. So the first question was, any recommendations to graduate students hoping to get some ship time on the Okeanos or on any other vessels out there?
Yeah, so I mean, the best thing you can do in that kind of realm is be a shore-based participant for the telepresence-enabled ships that do a lot of telepresence-enabled activities. There are generally calls in the science world on listservs and stuff like that at the beginning of every field season to sign up for participating. And if you know, pretty much everyone is allowed on Nautilus and Okeanos to participate from shore, if you're like at an accredited school kind of thing. And if, you know, that's the best way, is volunteering as a shore-based scientist. And you get to know the people, you get to know what's going on. And then once you're kind of in the network, ship time can come out of that. But there's a lot of people wanting ship time and whatnot. It's definitely not a guarantee, but starting to participate as a shore-based scientist is a good way to kind of at least get to know the people.
Yeah. I will give a plug for some of the informal educators out there. I know that there are opportunities to get on some boats with the Ocean Exploration Trust to do science communication, to do the telepresence work. So if you have an interest in that, you can look that up. And then for any undergraduate students on here, Sea Education Association in Woods Hole is also another great way to get out on a boat and do some hands-on science. And then the last question I see here, I think is, what is the half-life, I believe is what the question is supposed to say, of a clam or a mussel? So how long do shellfish live? Do we have an estimate on that?
I don't know.
At the deep sea? Yeah.
That is not, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go dig through the literature on that one.
I know from what I've seen, I don't know the exact age, but I know that the shellfish they really don't survive without those cold seeps or without the
absolutely. If the hydrogen sulfide source gets turned off, they die within months to a year at most. But how long an individual clam or mussel can survive with a good source of chemosynthetic reagents, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go look that one up.
Yeah. Maybe they do. Well, do they take the shell samples from any of those sites?
Absolutely. I imagine that is known. I would have to go play in the library for a little bit to find that.
Yeah. So that is something I guess we could all do a little research on, is how long those shellfish live. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much again for joining us, especially in our world right now that's so full of Zoom meetings. So everyone that did sign on, thank you so much. Everyone that's on Facebook, thank you for tuning in. OPAC does have another edition of this series coming up on December 3rd. We're going to be joined by artist Mara Hazeltine. She's had quite the experience also going out on the ocean and exploring with Tara Oceans in France. And she took a lot of plankton samples out in the ocean, and she has turned those plankton samples, which are microscopic, into macroscopic sculptures. So she's going to talk to us about how we take ocean science and turn it into ocean art to advocate for our marine world. So thank you again for joining us. If you haven't liked our Facebook page and subscribed to our YouTube channel, I highly encourage you to do so, because that is the fastest way to see more of our future events.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. And thank you all for coming out.
Yeah.